Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Zan. And today and now, we're going to be architecting multi-tenanted SaaS business app on Azure. So let me tell you about me a little bit. So I work for a company called MHR, where I'm architecting, luckily, the next generation multi-tenanted SaaS product called People First. And it's hosted on Azure, again, thankfully. Now, the product I'm working on has over 100 team members. We deploying over 20 microservices. And we have around 11 deployment regions, sorry, 11 deployment zones in 3 regions, UK, US, and EU. So my presentation is very much grounded in the personal, real-world experience. So today, the awesome bit is that we're going to forget about what we're currently doing, and you're all going to become ZDRIVE resources, okay? So you're all going to work for ZDRIVE, the startup, and then we're all going to work together to architect an application on Azure. So here we go. Let's meet the team, okay? So we're using the Flow delivery method. Thank you very much for creating it. Really appreciate it. There are 30 resources in our team. We have 3 months to launch version 1 of ZDRIVE. ZDRIVE is just like Dropbox, but it's for businesses. Our team is very much Microsoft, kind of a tech stack team, so they're very much kind of Microsoft devs. And we have quite limited cloud, security, and server management skills. We have the skills, but they're quite sparse. And here are some really high-level requirements for ZDRIVE. So ISO compliance, it's highly secure, it's got hourly backups, and also it's got federated authentication enabled. During the talk, I'll mention a few important factors, such as how versatile is an architecture or service, and also dev time. How much time does it take to actually implement certain service? And I'm going to use a traffic light system. So green's good, red, bad, yellow, medium, right? So we all got that? Put your hand up if you got it. Yay, that's good. Right, good start. OK, so let's begin designing. The first thing we're going to do is make sure that ZDRIVE uses multi-tenancy. So what is multi-tenancy? Well, it's not single tenancy, OK? Single tenancy is where you have quite isolated deployments. So for example, MHR, where I work, if they wanted to use our app, ZDRIVE, they would request it, and some person is going to run to a server room, get a VM kind of created or something. They'll install ZDRIVE on the machine, get it going, and then finally give it to MHR as a customer, and they'll use ZDRIVE, right? And same thing for objectivity, you know, they will have exactly the same thing, and like the STS as well, right, if they were using our service. So very kind of a siloed approach, right? So everyone gets their own thing, really isolated. One of the issues with this is that you get idle time. So for example, if MHR doesn't use ZDRIVE that much, and only 5% of CPU at the time, they'll get that, and they'll be using that, right, and we're just sitting there at 5%. Now, if objectivity, on the other hand, right, if they were using ZDRIVE much more than MHR, right, they actually will get constraints and locks and problems, right, so it's not really fair distribution, and it's quite a bit of waste. And also, with single tenancy, quite often, we shy away from distributed computing, so we end up scaling vertically, right, so we add more RAM, more CPU to the nodes, to try and avoid scalability, because it becomes quite painful and difficult. So quite often you see that people just give more juice to the boxes and scale vertically, right? Now, multi-tenancy is very different. So with multi-tenancy model, you share the compute tier. So MHR and objectivity will actually use same web app tier, same API tier, they'll use same service tier, right? But they could actually get their own storage area and store the data kind of separately separately, yeah. So I think I'm going to talk more about that shortly, why you would do that, or would you do that. The big benefit of multi-tenancy is the actually scalability of it, so that if you, if MHR uses a lot of it, basically we could scale out quite easily with cloud, where if we don't use much, we can scale back down. So multi-tenancy actually was enabled and became more popular with cloud, because cloud fits much nicer with multi-tenancy model. So single tenancy and multi-tenancy are both SaaS, okay? So there's debate around, oh, if you're on-prem, you're not SaaS. It's still SaaS because service provider handles upgrades, installation, and hosting all for you. You don't care about any of those things. It's software as a service. So it's still SaaS. So that's a bit of background for ZDRIVE and what we're going to do with multi-tenancy model. Now, let's talk a little bit about logical architecture, how we're going to structure ZDRIVE. This is a form. Okay, so it's a pretty ugly form. But the thing is, what we're trying to get at here is that with tenancy, multi-tenancy model, we've got to register a form like you normally would, and or save your data, right? So when you save your data, you go to Web UI, you fill in that form, you call your tenant service, you validate the form, make sure it's okay, and then you store that data in tenant catalog. Tenant catalog is very much like a Microsoft kind of term almost, or they use that term quite a bit. So tenant catalog is almost like a DNS equivalent for multi-tenancy. It's where you go to look up your tenant. You know, if someone goes to URL, you can actually look them up and know who they are, okay? Very classic, three-tier architecture. This is very boring stuff so far. Okay, so typical user will go to our UI. We'll call tenant service will call tenant catalog. Tenant catalog is going to have the information about the actual tenant. We'll know where to go, where to route you for authentication. You authenticate, I get some AD, come back to Web UI, and use our awesome ZDRIVE, like Dropbox again, drag your files in there, share the files, whatever. Now, you would use data store. So on data tier, data store will be used for the metadata for the files. So if you want to do authorization stuff for the file, you want to share the file, metadata is stored in data store. And we use file storage for files. Okay, so that's really basics. This is really high-level stuff. It's very much technologically agnostic. There's nothing here that binds us to tech at the moment. Now let's start coloring it in with architectural decisions and services. Physical design. I'm not walking away, by the way. Okay. The first debate is subdomain or URL path. Pros with subdomain is the fact that you can enable customization. You can point your own home domain to actually provider's domain, okay, using CNAMEs. It's a pretty powerful approach. You can also seamlessly move tenants between regions. So for example, imagine you have 100 tenants in one deployment region. You have another 100 tenants in another, and another 100 somewhere else. Now imagine that your zone A is getting very, very hot with too many tenants. You want to move your tenant from one place to another place. With subdomains, you can do that using CNAMEs. You can actually reconfigure the DNS and make that happen. Okay, so it's really flexible for scalable architecture. Now, you also get better log quality. Now, I'm a bit sad, and I spend a lot of my time in IIS logs. I love IIS logs. I admit it, okay? So in IIS logs, when you look at the host, you can actually, with subdomain, you can actually see the subdomain.domain. It's really good for parsing and data manipulation. It's really good log quality as well. Now, the cons are it's not free. Customization work is required. So for example, if you do want to point your home, kind of your own domain to ZDRIVE, ZDRIVE needs to do some work to upload SSL certs, and they'll also need to punch through a host name on the app service plan, for example, or service fabric, whatever your choice is, and we'll discuss that actually shortly. So there is customization work that's required. And also, tenant region allocation also requires work. If you want to move a tenant from zone A to zone C, it's, again, CNAME manipulation. And you probably don't want to do CNAME DNS manipulation manually. So you probably want to create some kind of a tool to do that, right? So again, it requires some dev work. Hence, when you look at the right side, or your left side, whatever it is, how versatile the service is, it's a very versatile approach. But dev time is, I believe it's red, or is it yellow? It's one of the two. It's not super simple. Okay, URL path, on the other hand, is very simple to implement. It's just / MHR, but you don't get all the pros that you just got with subdomains. Okay, you can't do customization that easily. You can't seamlessly move your tenants. And log quality is not as good as well. In your IIS logs, if you use it like a single-page app, for example, you get a referrer instead of getting the host name, and that's easy to spoof. And parsing on query strings is harder as well in the IIS logs. So it's not as good from that point of view. So what should you go for? Well, subdomain it is, mainly because on the greenfield project, there's really no reason not to go for it. It's a very simple approach. It doesn't require much DNS work to set it up and get you going. If you want to configure it just for a single zone, you simply do a star and a CNAME, and you point to your app. And you just allow star host names on the app. It just works out of the box. It's amazing. And it gives you all this flexibility and all these options in the future. So I thoroughly recommend that approach. So there you go. Our web UI now is going to be on the ZDRIVE.com using subdomain approach. Next point, also very contentious, is authentication options. One thing I'll say is DIY is an option, but I highly recommend that you don't do it in this day and age, because it's quite difficult, or people quite often, I've seen it many times, get the hashing and salting incorrectly with this stuff, and they forget to update their encryption policies, right? So if you can help it, please don't do it. Just avoid it like a plague. Now, you can use social media for your authentication option, but if you're building a business app like ZDRIVE, it's very much for other businesses. And other businesses are not going to be comfortable, unless they're hipster businesses, with allowing you to actually log in from anywhere you want. They probably will want you to use some kind of a thing like Azure AD or something equivalent, more enterprisey, so they can actually control the password complexity and different password policies. Okay, so I would thoroughly not recommend you to use social media for kind of an enterprise situation, unless again the company wants to do it. That's fine if they want to. But Azure AD and Azure AD B2C are very good options, and there are many others, by the way. There are many other services which I'm not mentioning here, and I actually had originally quite a few of them on my slide, and I removed them because it just gets confusing. Now, which one should you choose? You know, Azure AD, social media, use some other service. Well, the good news is you don't have to decide. That's the best architectural thing you can ever do, is abstract it out using something like OpenID Connect, right? If you use OpenID Connect, for example, it's a spec that you follow. And there is .NET framework, basically libraries out there that you can use for this kind of stuff. You literally just use NuGet packages, you just reference it in, and you're using the library or straight out of the box. And the good thing is that many providers now are coming on board. So Azure, Azure AD, Google, and many other companies are compliant with the spec. Okay. Thing is, from my personal experience, a lot of companies, you're not going to get it right with what the company actually wants. It's highly unlikely that you're going to get it right. Some of them will want to use G Suite, some of them will want to use Azure AD, some of them want some kind of other configuration. Some of them will not even have an AD because they're quite small, let's say. Yeah. So here we go. Wait, now a decision. We're going to couple to the middleware and not couple to the actual service. Okay. Next thing, the most important thing, in a way, web hosting options. Now, there are many options on Azure when it comes to web hosting. Let's start with the function apps, okay? What's my verdict? You know, instead of Glenn's. Let's see. Okay, so personally, I think function apps are quite great for maintenance tasks. So there are quite a few great blog posts out there talking about how they've enabled a function app to actually scan logs for IP addresses to try and prevent like a DDoS attack, for example, right? It's great stuff. And also, function apps are fairly cheap if you're using it at a small scale. They are really cheap out of the box, right? You barely pay anything up to so many usages. Things like also research and experiments. So if you're building an app and you're not quite sure yet how it's going to hang together, you're prototyping, use function app, right? Just put it together, some C# code, compile it down, deploy it, use it, have a look, right? Awesome for that. Things like lightweight async microservices. So again, event kind of driven architecture, but very lightweight. You know, if you don't have to worry about like really big heavy services or dependency injection, and you have to reference all these DLLs and stuff and have all these different deployments. Again, it's better kind of for very small kind of lightweight async microservices. And also, actually what Glenn mentioned as well, is calculations, right? So distributed calculations and computation at distributed scale, but some kind of sums and averages and some computation is great for that. Now, ZDRIVE is going to be a quite kind of a big single-page app or MVC app, so we need that tier, many APIs. So I would not recommend a function app for ZDRIVE. Like Glenn said as well, it's not a cure for cancer, so it's just it's got its place, but not for ZDRIVE, in my opinion. Now, next one is cloud service. Now, cloud service is no longer supported part of the ARM templates resource groups, so you can't create it using ARM templates anymore. In my books, that means that service is being depreciated. And as such, I would only use it for brownfield projects where you are already using the service. So ZDRIVE is a new service, so I wouldn't use cloud service. Next one's container service. Container service is very much used for Docker image deployment. It runs compatible Linux runtime. You can use Kubernetes with it to actually have your file definitions with it and define your orchestration. And it's great for microservices. Now, ZDRIVE is very much a Microsoft dev team. They don't know much of the Docker stuff, and they don't love Linux that much, right? They're a little bit more old school, right? So it's not a great service for ZDRIVE. And I'll talk, by the way, more about Service Fabric later on, and I think there's some similarities you can probably draw between those two services, and yeah. Next one is virtual machine scale sets. Now, virtual machine scale sets is very much kind of a hardware service, so you can, again, it's kind of, they call it IaaS service. It's great for brownfield projects or lift and shift. Got to be careful on the last word, lift and shift. So it's great for that, but the thing is though, with virtual machine scale sets, you don't get the benefits of orchestration, deployments, you don't get the benefits of VIP switching, you don't get the benefits of like all this orchestration that comes with other services. So I wouldn't use it for ZDRIVE, it's very heavy going, okay? So we're left with two services that I want to talk about in more detail. So app service environment is an amazing service. I call it pretty much IaaS as a service. You get a bunch of ports, 80, 443, right? And off you go. Put your files on there, your MVC app, and off you go. You can scale quite easily. It's kind of upgrades for you automatically at the OS level. It's designed for web app hosting. It's got rich diagnostics. Your IIS logs that I love so much, the tracing, it's all there. Also, it's got web jobs, right? Web jobs are awesome for things like very lightweight compute behind the scenes. So, for example, watermarking images is a classic one. You're kind of handling messages from a queue. You can even use create app service plan and create function apps and use that service plan with kind of the app service environment. So it's pretty cool, right? It's quite a flexible service. And it's super simple and easy to use. Now, having said it's super simple and easy to use, if you go into the cloud for the first time, it can be a paradigm shift in your mind because you are going more towards the not hardware as such, but you are going more towards scalability, some configuration, things that you don't normally think about as a developer. So it can be a little bit, a bit of a learning curve. But in comparison to other services, it's very easy going, very easy. A few cons for the service, it's you can't actually access OS level stuff. So you can't RDP onto the box and just install some software that you wish, right? So you just can't do that. Also, it's got limited scalability. So you can go up to 10 to 20 nodes, but beyond that, it's quite limited. And the limited hardware. So you get 3 different tiers. So you got standard, basic, and those got also different kind of sub-tiers. It's like 1 core, 2 cores, 4 cores, a quite limited RAM, right? So you can't really customize your machine that much if you need to. So when would you use app service environment? Well, you can use it for enterprise-grade applications, most definitely. But it's got a limited scale. So it really depends on how you're going to set up your deployments and how you're going to set up your multi-tenancy and what's the capacity planning around this application development. Now, it's great for startups and greenfield projects. If you're still figuring out what your app is going to be, how it's going to work, you just kind of, I don't want to use the word agile, but if you are iterating for your application development, use this, because actually it's very simple and easy to use. And it's great for web apps. It's fantastic for web apps, right? You wouldn't build a completely custom service for like drone management, right? It's like with different ports we're using this. It's mainly for web apps. You get 2 ports, like I mentioned already, and they're web ports, okay? Service Fabric gives you full OS access. You can jump onto the boxes, install whatever you want, do what you like with it. You get VNet perimeter and a gateway. That's really cool. You get dedicated IP address given to you. You can scale to hundreds of nodes, and you get a much better hardware choice. You can really customize your application if you want to. The cons are great flexibility comes complexity. So you get much higher learning curve on it, right? So you got to, for example, I wanted to deploy .NET Framework and run it on the Service Fabric. And to do that, I have to do some custom work around templates, or I have to use like a desired state configuration to actually get it going. It's not just out of the box on there. Web apps give you a lot of runtimes, like Nodes, .NET Framework, that kind of stuff. It's awesome. With this, it's a bit more hands-on. If you're building a .NET Core app, the good news is that actually it's part of the Visual Studio templates. It's actually there straight away. You just literally press .NET Core app, uses Kestrel, and you just deploy your application. It's very simple. It's awesome. But the thing is, though, even with that, you still got to really think about things like hardware, IP addresses, different nodes, configuration around it. You have to use the XML configuration files to configure your service. So it's a bit heavier going. And like I mentioned already, it's got limited support for runtimes. So use this for high-scale applications, heavily regulated applications. So if you need a VNet perimeter, with tight control, use this. It gives you that. Again, if you know what you're already doing, or you are more established environment, again, use this. Kind of you don't need to experiment that much. Or if you want to build custom services. So if you want to build like, for example, like your own database service, you can use this. Like Azure, apparently, is using Service Fabric to build their own, actually build out Azure database. They use Service Fabric to actually host Azure database, right? It's a really powerful service. Okay, so for ZDRIVE, given it's a startup, it's a greenfield project, and we're learning on the cloud, I thoroughly recommend that we go for app service environment. So here we go. Our web tier is now an app service environment, and our service tier is now also an app service environment. Now, let's talk about multi-tenant data separation. Now, there's a lot of talk about this, and there's like different variances on this, like different versions of how you can do this. The thing is, it all comes back down to these two approaches, right? These are two main concepts. This is the essence, if you will. So, one approach is that you have storage container per tenant. Another one is that you just dump everybody one storage, right? So, storage container per tenant. The big pro, if you're building a business app for other businesses, let's say you use this approach, MHR would get like their own database for ZDRIVE, okay? That means that if MHR, by mistake, deletes the root folder, they can call us and say, whoops, can you please restore it? And actually, we can do that. We can actually restore the database or storage container back because we've got a separation. It's awesome. Also, if MHR leaves us as ZDRIVE, we can actually quite easily have a clean break. You know, just delete them and you forget about it. It's done. It's quite nice. You also get sharding out of the box, which is really cool. So because every tenant's got their own storage container, you can quite easily, you know, put them in a different location, more premium service tier. And the thing is, you can really manage the load a lot easier because it's kind of a sharding built into it. Also, physical isolation, which is quite important. So physical isolation is cool because by having this physical separation, you're kind of enforcing a strong security barrier. Okay, it's less likely that you're going to make a mistake and by mistake actually leak other customers' data. So if MHR was using the application, it's less likely that they would get Objectivity's data, you know, that kind of thing. And another pro, which is, I wouldn't highly recommend this, but you can do it, is you can give direct access to the actual container. So if you're building some kind of application and your customers need reporting capability, you can actually give them a schema or something like that, or SQL solution, basically, with read-only access to your data. So they can go direct and do some reporting on it. That's not possible with the other approach. But the cons are, it's harder to manage and upgrade, right? So you've got more things to manage and look after. If it's a schema-based solution, you have to upgrade each thing as well. It can be quite heavy from that point of view. If MHR becomes a customer, you know, you've got to provision them as a new resource, like a new container. To do that, you've got to call some API and actually create this container, right? So that requires API calls, management around, you know, the response back times. So you've got to actually have some orchestration around the creation of these containers. So it's more complexity around development and higher cost. Depending on the model that you go for, it can be more expensive. Now, the other approach is where you just dump everyone in one thing is just simple. It's really simple, right? And you can see why all the pros are on the list. The cons are they can't restore individual tenants. If you do become really good, if ZDRIVE becomes a success, you got to think about things like sharding. And that can get quite tricky and complicated, okay? No isolation. If you have no isolation as such, basically you have to discriminate between different tenants. To discriminate between different tenants, you've got to use things like foreign keys or something else like that. And the thing is, if you forget about a foreign key during development, there's a chances that you're going to leak basically all data. So everyone's going to see each other's data. So there is more complexity around the development time because of this. So ZDRIVE is very much a storage data company. And given the fact that they are a storage data company, I think it's extremely important that they separate data out separately. It's their business. So there you go, another decision. Right, so here on the right, basically we're showing that tenant's metadata, data store, is going to be per tenant, and our file storage also is per tenant. Okay, now there are also many database or storage options on the cloud as well, right? I'm not going to go through all of them, it's impossible. We'll be here literally for the next 2 weeks, and I think you all want to go home at some point today. Okay, so I'm going to talk about two main two main ones, which I think cover majority of use cases. SQL database and storage. Storage is awesome. It's basically a file system in the cloud with an API. It's awesome. You get things like IP address, VNet restrictions. You can issue SaaS tokens. SaaS tokens allow you to enable things like key value pattern, so you don't have to go through your entire infrastructure to upload a file. You can go directly into the storage to download and upload, which is cool. It comes with things like transparent disk encryption. So at the hard drive level, Microsoft straight away encrypts your data. Also, it's got a new feature that came out about 6 months ago, a year ago. It's called file access logs. So you can see at the file level who accessed what file, from what IP address, user agent information, all that good stuff. Again, I love my logs. Okay, so, and it's easy to use, and it's very cheap, right? It's a file system, and it's cheap. It's awesome. Now, the cons are that it has no point-in-time backups. That's a very surprising thing for us. Like, I found that really strange. It's got no point-in-time backups. So you have to use a third-party service to back your data up, or you have to implement your own service to do it, right? Just be aware of that. But it has got geo replication out of the box. But the thing is, it's read-only. So if you do fail over, your replica is going to be read-only. So the application will be partially not working. SQL database, got a few similar features. A few things I want to kind of point out is always encrypted. That came out about, I think, about 3 years ago. The driver level feature, awesome feature. Data masking, which is really cool. It's got things like audit and threat detection. So audit level, audit basically logs away everything that happens to your SQL server, right? It's really cool. It creates like XCL files. Threat detection is really sweet. You get like machine learning behind the scenes, analyzing the access and usage, and tells you if something weird is happening. It's great. So, fully recommend that. It's got point-in-time restore as well out of the box, up to 5 minutes. So it's basically, if you do lose your data, you're only going to have 5 minutes of data loss. That is great. And you get things like replication and failover as well. So replication allows you to replicate your data, and you can have like read-only replicas to improve performance of your application, or for things like active-active. And the failover obviously gives you failover groups, so you can fail over during a DR situation. The cons are, it doesn't support basically all the T-SQL, all the features that you might be used to with on-prem SQL Server. That's kind of the con, right? So it doesn't come with everything that you probably are used to. Now, personally, it has never impacted me or any kind of my team members. Nobody really cares that much about those features not being there. So, but it's a con. I thought I should mention it and give it a fair trial. So, for ZDRIVE, I think we should be using SQL database and storage. And here we go. So, tenant catalog, and this example here is done in SQL database. We're using SQL database for MHR, objectivity, and other tenants. And we're also creating kind of a separate folders in Azure storage for every tenant as well, okay? So we're using the concept of separation. There's a little icon, by the way, a little Azure icon. That just means that you can have a very strong firewall, an ACL, around your services. You can actually lock it down so only your service tier can access your data tier. So here we go, final design for ZDRIVE. I'll give you a minute to have a look at that. So you can take it to the next level and make it really complicated to meet more advanced requirements. Okay? You can do it. If you need to meet things like active-active to improve your SLAs, if you're running mission-critical apps, you can use things like Traffic Manager. use things like the failover groups, use things like service bus with, with pairing. So a lot of stuff you can do like that. Okay, so you can take it to the next level and meet more advanced SLAs and meet more kind of advanced DevOps scenarios where you want to kind of release hourly or daily or whatever. You can do that. If you're interested, by the way, in more complicated kind of architecture like this, because maybe you're already doing some of the basics, please come and grab me, during lunch or at some point throughout the day. I'm more than happy to discuss with you any architectural stuff. I love this thing. I love this stuff, right? So just come and grab me. Or you can keep it really simple, really, really simple. Just, deploy a monolith on the app service environment and use a database, and off you go. Done. So it really depends on your requirements and what's important for your business. Now, Azure has made it so simple to deploy your services onto the cloud, and actually, as devs, we now are spoiled. We can literally just code some stuff and deploy it. It's never been simpler, right? So please don't create artificial barriers where you don't need to, okay? Azure made it simple, so keep it simple and iterate and improve your services. Oh yes, important point. If you want to see a demo of this, for example, got a multi-tenanted app on the cloud, you can actually check out my GitHub account, and you can actually have a look at the demo there. Now, the next slide is going to say thank you. I still have some time, so you're not going anywhere just yet. I was hoping for a Q&A, so I'm going to give you some bonus tracks. Bonus tracks. Surprising thing about Azure PaaS services, they don't support distributed transactions. So put your hand up if you are using things like transaction scopes or unit of work. So quite a few of you using that, that's great. So if you have your unit of work or transaction scope, right, and you basically have your insert, update, delete, and you might have something like, add the file to a storage, and then update, delete, insert, whatever, right? If you call the file storage, Azure Storage, somewhere in there, if you get to the bottom and your node dies, you're going to have a file just sitting there on Azure Storage, unreferenced. It'd be just orphaned file, just sitting there, okay? It's a similar thing with all Azure PaaS services. You've got to really think about that because you might have the situation. It doesn't come with this distributed transaction thing. So yeah, solutions they're not brilliant solutions, but they're solutions, is just use database. Okay, that's one thing you can do because that's kind of use that transactional approach. And or just accept the fact that you might get some unreferenced orphan files. A few other things I want to mention as well. Azure AD. Azure AD is an awesome service from Microsoft. It integrates with your on-premise AD, or it can be just a standalone service. It enables things like corporate single sign-ons. You can manage your users, devices, groups, that kind of stuff. It doesn't come with kind of built-in accounts, so you can't just have like, I don't know, scott.smith@gmail.com, okay? It needs to be part of the corporate domain, so you can't really have that kind of random email or the random password. And it's got quite a limited UI customization capability, and it does user self-service, customization, and auditing are all premium features. And they can be very expensive, like really expensive. But enterprise grade, right? So it's good stuff. Now, Azure AD B2C, on the other hand, is very much kind of a client-based service, right? So it's very much for kind of business to customer service. And that does come with kind of a any account policy, right? So you can actually have like john.smith@anything.com created in that AD, you could just have them there, right? So this is great, by the way. Why am I saying this, right? So a lot of companies, some of the companies will have Azure AD, or they try to go to Azure AD, That's great. But what about your small customers who don't have an AD, okay, who want you to have built-in accounts? So with Azure AD B2C, you can enable built-in accounts. So they don't have to have kind of Azure AD, right? That's the general idea. And I'll show you in a minute what I mean by this in more detail. There's a screenshot I'll share with you. The con is with B2C that it can feel disjointed a bit, and you still need an Azure AD for your overall enterprise AD integration though as well, right? So let me show you something now, right? So here we go. So ZDRIVE has got this form. You put your company name in, subdomain approach that we've gone for, which is great. You put your email address in, and if they tick that checkbox saying, I want a generic kind of thing, right, they'll put in there their Azure AD keys. By keys, I mean client ID and a URL. We don't have to know their keys. We're just going to throw them to authentication server, they log in there, and they get routed back to us, and we just get a token, and we use that token throughout the entire stack, okay? That's an approach. Now, if your customers don't have any kind of Azure AD or any kind of OpenAD Connect authentication server, you can provide them with a built-in account. So for example, if they don't tick that box, you can say, well, give me your password, right? Tell me what you want it to be, like a normal thing, right? And behind the scenes, you can call Azure AD B2C and provide that built-in account experience without doing the whole DIY password management. It's just an approach to that problem, okay? And actually, I think that is it. Thank you.